tonight. Okay, very good. Okay, on number 412, let's sing on the first stanza, When Shadows Fall. When shadows fall and the night covers all, there are things that my eyes cannot see. I'll never fear, for the Savior is near. My Lord abides with me. How can I fear? Jesus is near. He ever watches over me. Worries all cease. He gives me peace. How can I fear with Jesus? Let's explain something. On the chorus, you'll notice there's two lines and the words are scattered differently. The melody line is the second line on the chorus, okay, the bottom line on the chorus. The other line is another part. And it's beautiful when the parts are together. But we're just going to try to get the one part down, the main melody tonight. So think of the words as we sing. The first verse we just said that when shadows in life fall and the night covers all, there's things I can't see. Otherwise, I don't know how things are always going to work out. But I'll never fear, for the Savior is near. My Lord abides with me. Now let's go on to verse 2. When I'm alone. Ready? When I'm alone and I face the unknown, and I fear what the future may be, I can depend on the strength of my friend. He walks along with me. How can I fear? Jesus is near. He ever watches over me. Worries all cease. He gives me peace. How can I fear with Jesus? Can we sing the third stanza at the end of the message? So we'll say that, keep your hymn book nearby. And right at the end of the message tonight, we'll go over stanza 3. How many of you had not heard that song before tonight? 3 people? 4 people? Okay. All right. Well, I'm glad that a few of us knew it. That made it easier for the rest of you to hear the sound of it. It's really not a difficult song to sing, not complicated at all. But the message is beautiful, and I think so is the tune. Now, did you know there's a verse in the Bible that has the words that I have in my title? Put my tears in your bottle. Now that may seem kind of strange, but it's found in verse 8 of Psalm 56. Let's go ahead and read the psalm. You follow along as I read tonight. David, now let's look at the title because this weighs into the content in this psalm. It'll help us to understand it better, I think. To the chief musician, that's something that's in front of many of the psalms because David did intend for all of his psalms to be sung as well as to be read and studied. So we are in Psalm 56 tonight. Psalm 56, the prayer bulletin and the message are right there on that chair. Good to have you. Okay, so we're about ready to read verse 1 of Psalm 56. Be merciful unto me. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't finish the title. To the chief musician upon Jonath Elam Rekokim. Well, this is Hebrew, obviously, okay? This is a transliteration of Hebrew, and I'll tell you what the meaning is of that when we get into the notes. It's a miktam of David. Now, miktam refers to something that you're supposed to contemplate, think carefully on. A miktam of David. Now, here's the key part. When the Philistines took him in Gath. Do you remember that account in the book of 1 Samuel? When David was running from Saul, he decided in his heart, if I stay here in the land of Judah, Saul's eventually going to capture me, because there were several close calls. But God enabled him to escape every time in some amazing ways. But David decided he's eventually going to catch me and kill me. I'm going to go somewhere where he can't get at me, and that was with the Philistines in Gath. Now, do you know where Gath is? If anybody, do you ever listen to the news? Gath is in the Gaza Strip, the current day Gaza Strip. It's right in that same general location. There were 5 main Philistine cities. Gaza was one of them. Ekron, Gath, and there were 2 others, and I know them, but I'm not thinking of them all as quickly. So there were 5 main cities. Gath was one of them. Gaza was another one. And that Gaza Strip is the general area where the Philistines lived in ancient times. Isn't it interesting? It's the same location where the terrorists are now, well, the Palestinians live there. They're not all terrorists, but the terrorists have control of that area. Even though they've been stripped of their power, they're still trying to regain their power. You're going to hear more about them, about Hamas soon, I'm sure. But let's go on. That's current day. We're looking at the day of David when the Philistines lived there. So that's the background. Be merciful unto me, O God, for man would swallow me up. He fighting daily oppresses me. You see, the Philistines did not like that David was there, and the king of Gath had allowed David to come, and the people of the city, the people of the army, and the rest of the people were suspicious of David, and rightly so. And they said, we want him out of here. And so they were about to grab hold of him and kill him. And do you remember what David did to avoid capture and death? He acted like he was a crazy man. He allowed the spittle to run down over his beard and was making silly noises and was scribbling on the doors and different things like that. And the king of Gath said, he's a madman. Why should I be afraid of him? And so he let him go, let him leave the city. But he must have written this psalm either during or after this experience. My enemies would daily swallow me up. Verse 2, for they are many that fight against me, O thou Most High. What time I am afraid, I will trust in you. In God I will praise his word. In God I have put my trust. I will not fear what flesh can do unto me. Now, what is written on every, I believe is it every $1 bill? And in God we trust. In God we trust. In God we trust. This is a theme of this psalm. So what he says in verse 4, in God I will praise his word. In God I have put my trust. I will not fear what flesh, mere mortal men, can do unto me. Every day they twist my words. Rest means twist my words. All their thoughts are against me for evil. They gather themselves together. They hide themselves. They mark my steps when they wait for my soul. Shall they escape by iniquity? In your anger, cast down the people, the enemy people, O God. You tell my wanderings. Put my tears into thy bottle. Are they not in your book? When I cry unto you, then shall my enemies turn back. This I know, for God is for me. In God will I praise his word. In the Lord will I praise his word. In God I have put my trust. I will not be afraid what man can do unto me. Now, if you were right in the midst of a bunch of bloodthirsty people that wanted your life, wanted to kill you because of what David had done to the Philistines in years past. Remember, he killed Goliath? Remember that he helped Saul and his armies, and when they would come back from battle, the women would cry out, Saul has slain his thousands and David his 10,000s. And that's when Saul began to be jealous of David and tried to kill him. He knew that God was going to make him the king one day, and Saul was afraid of him. So anyway, so he is putting his trust in God. What can man do unto me? You say, well, they can do a lot because they're very powerful and they're very strong. But God is stronger. We must never forget that. Your vows are upon me, O God. I will render praises unto you, for you have delivered my soul from death. Will you not deliver my feet from falling, that I may walk before God in the light of the living? Beautiful little psalm. Now, in the beginning of the introduction, I talk about mathematics. You say, mathematics? What in the world are you doing here tonight? Well, I used to be an English teacher, but I never taught math. But as I mentioned here, I did very well in math in elementary school. I always made straight A's. It was very easy for me until I got to Algebra 1 and Algebra 2. And then, now I didn't fail, but I struggled a lot. It obviously was not my forte. Calculus, I had an opportunity to take calculus, and I said, no way, it's not required. I'm not going to try. I'm not going to take it. Now, my brother is just the opposite. He became a chemical engineer, and he was very good at both chemistry and math. Chemistry and math were my two weakest points in my educational life. But anyway, the interesting point here is this passage talks about God being able to use math very effectively. God numbered his ways. We're going to see that when we get to verse 8. So we ought to be thankful that God is good at counting, and that God is good with numbers, and that he keeps track of every single one of us, every detail of our lives. We'll say more about that as we go through the psalm. There's three easy divisions to see in this psalm. Verses 1 through 4 are the first division. Now, one way we know this is where the first division ends, look at the words of verse 4. In God I will praise his word. In God I have put my trust. I will not fear what flesh can do to me. Now, look at verses 5 through 11. That's the second section. Look at the verse 11. In God I have put my trust. I will not be afraid. What can man do unto me? You see, that same expression ends both of those sections. So that's how we know. We're not just making it up. That's clearly the end of section 2. And then verses 12 and 13 are the third section of the songs. But as you notice, the theme, as we read through this, you see that expression twice, and you see similar expressions in this psalm. What David's trying to tell us, why does he write this? He wants to share it with God's people. We don't need to be afraid, even if we're in the very worst of circumstances, even if everything in our lives is topsy-turvy, even if people are out to get us, even if we feel like we have lots of adversaries and enemies, God is stronger than all of them. What can mere flesh, what can mere man do to us? Now, we can say those words very easily, but when push comes to shove and we really get in hard times, especially if you go into a doctor and he uses the C word or something like that, you know what the C word is. Do I have to explain it? It can put fear in you, can it? What's going to happen? Oh, he just now figured out what I was saying. C word is cancer. I used to tell people when I took them through marriage counseling, now once you're married, you're not allowed to use the D word. Guess what that meant? Divorce. You can talk about your problems, your differences, but you should never bring up the D word. That word, take that out of your vocabulary as a married couple. Make sure that you know that with God's help, you can get through whatever problems you have to face. Anyway, that's not what my message is about tonight. We're talking about the C word here. Okay. So, in God, he puts his trust. And so we must do the same. Trust God and don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Now, the title, I told you I'd talk about it just briefly. The words that are in Hebrew in the title have the meaning to the tune of Dove of Silence. These kinds of expressions in the titles are usually a song tune. Some song began with these words, the dove of silence of far off people or places. And so they would know when they see that expression, oh, I know that tune. And so they would put it to that tune. Several of our hymns have the same hymn tune. And that's the way the Psalms were as well. And we talked about the rest of it as well. Now, let's look at the first section. Foes and fears followed by faith. I'm going to go through this. I'm not going to rush through it, but I'm not going to go real slow. Notice that there are foes and fears followed by faith. Those are the three headings of this first section. Now, I'm not going to necessarily go verse by verse. I'm going to skip a little bit, but I have the verse numbers where I get the information. First of all, he talks about man. He talks about man in his weakness. He said, man would swallow me up. The word for man there is a word that expresses mankind as a weak being, But the name for God that's used in verse 1 is the word Elohim. That comes from the root idea of strong, his strength. Man is in his weakness. God is the strong one. And so notice he puts those two terms right together in verse 1. So man in his weakness is my foe. And 9 times in the psalm we have the word, his name Elohim. 9 times God, Elohim, the God of strength, is used in this psalm. And then in 2 places he talks about man being a fighter. In verse 1, for man would swallow me up. And then it goes on to say, he fighting daily oppresses me. And then in verse 2, it's in the plural. So an individual fighter, man is spoken in the singular. But then in verse 2, they are many that fight against me. So he's got a lot of people fighting against him. Then they are called watchers. Now trust me in this. The words in verse 2, the original has the idea of someone who keeps watch over someone else with an evil intent. Okay? They are watchers with an evil intent. Thus they are enemies. Notice the word enemies there. The foes are enemies who are watching him in order to find a way to destroy him. Then he refers to them in verse 4 as flesh. In God I have put my trust. I will not fear what flesh. Now some translations translate that man. And that's not a bad translation, but he uses the actual word for flesh here. Talking about man in his mere fleshly being, as a fleshly being. He's weak. He's vulnerable. What can mere flesh do to me? And then he uses a verb twice in both verse 1 and 2, swallow me up. The idea of that verb can mean trample. Some think it means trample. Others think it means snap after, to gasp after or snap after. The idea is that they're pursuing him with the idea of catching him and gobbling him up, okay? Or trampling him. It could be translated either way. And so again, you see these people are out to destroy him, out to hurt him. And then he mentions that they are oppressing him in the last part of verse 1. Thus we see in this first part, David asks God to be gracious unto him. He starts verse 1, be merciful. Show mercy, show grace unto me. The Hebrew word basically means be gracious, but when you're gracious, the idea of mercy can be included in it as well. So he has foes, but he also has fears. 3 times he talks about all day long. It doesn't just happen once in a while. All day long this is happening to me. Every day, every minute of every day, I'm in danger. Every minute of the day, they're watching me. They're out to get me. They're out to trample me. They're out to pant after me and to swallow me up if they can. And so he says, I'm harassed all day long, verse 1, verse 2, and verse 5. And also he says in verse 2, they are exalted and proud. Now, I have to disagree with the choice of the translation here. It's a possible translation, but I personally don't agree with the way they've translated the word. And so I'm going to give you what I think. And commentators will take either translation. Either verse 2 is referring to God at the end. They be many that fight against me, and then he addresses God, O thou most high. But the word also it may not be referring to God, it may be referring to how exalted and lifted up and proud these enemy people were. And I think personally that's where it's applied here. They that fight against me are doing so as a proud and haughty and exalted person. They are exalted and proud. He says in verse 3, the day that I fear. The mention of fear strongly supports the references in the title to David's time in Gath, because he had every reason, humanly speaking, to be afraid of the Philistines. The Philistines were Israel's strongest, nearest, and most powerful enemy at the time, at David's time. And 1 Samuel 21 verse 2 specifically states that when the servants of Achish accused David before Achish, David took the words to heart and greatly feared Achish the king. He greatly feared him. But David thought it through, prayed to God, wrote the words of the psalm, and he came to the conclusion that he did not need to be afraid. He didn't need to fear. He could trust God. So look at verses 3 and 4. Faith overcomes fear. What time I'm afraid, I will trust instead of being afraid. I will trust. When I'm afraid, I shall not be afraid, because I'm going to trust. Faith looks to a powerful God. He is Elohim, after all, the powerful one, the strong one. It's his word. And he's using the word here with the idea of what God says by way of promises. When he promises his people, this is what I will do for you. This is how I'm going to help you. God's word is reliable. It's true. You can count on it. God will do for you exactly what he says he will do. The day that I fear, faith will overcome fear. Faith looks to a powerful God. Now, what is trust? Trust is resting oneself totally upon God. The one Hebrew word, the word that means trust, has the idea of rolling yourself upon someone, resting upon someone, just relying on them totally, being relaxed, rolling yourself upon them. And so that's the idea of trust in the Old Testament. Mere flesh or man can really do nothing to me that's going to hurt God's purposes for my life. When we have that promise in our hearts, not just in our minds, many times as a pastor over the years, there have been events and circumstances that came up that were frightening, in the sense, not physical danger, but people, adversaries, people who might want to go against and fight against the plans that we have in our church, etc., etc. And there are times that you could become afraid if you're worried about people more than you are trusting in God. And this morning, I had the privilege of going over to Christian leadership, not Christian, CLA. The C stands for, not Christian, ALA, American Leadership Academy. I had the wrong first letter, ALA. I went over to ALA to listen to Dan Bewley's history class because one of our church members was talking in their class. Mike Simpson was talking about his times in Vietnam to the students, and then they had the chance to ask questions. But Mike Simpson was in Vietnam. Did you know that Mike Simpson was a Green Beret? Now, what kind of people become Green Berets? The weaker people in the military or the stronger people? The stronger one. They are the elite of the elite, the Green Beret. Well, Mike Simpson is a Green Beret. He may have told me that, but I must have forgotten about it, because hearing that today, I was thinking, wow. And he has this picture when he was 25 years old with Cambodian soldiers that he was training to be able to go back to their country and fight against the communist regime that had taken over Cambodia while he was over in Vietnam. He talked about some of the near-death experiences that he had over there. He talked about the time that he was shot with a bullet right here, but he had a canteen in there, and the bullet went into the canteen and never touched his body. Can you imagine that? And he talked about the time that he was a parachute trooper, And he did over 3,000 jumps. But one time when he jumped I think he said it was on a university campus, the parachute must deploy at least 400 feet above ground. It has to be fully deployed to slow you down enough that you can hit the ground at the speed that you'll still be alive. His parachute failed and did not deploy until he was less than 300 feet from the ground. And he hit really hard, and he landed on an asphalt street. That's when he got his back injury that has bothered him the rest of his life. So he was talking about experiences of fear and trouble and injuries and et cetera, where his life was at danger. One time a landmine went off as he was just a short distance in front of it and blew him through the air and knocked him into the top of the bunker where he was trying to get into and did some damage to what I think it was his right shoulder. Anyway, he had a lot of experiences. But you know what? Whatever the dangers are, whatever the troubles are that we have to face, we don't need to fear, even in those kind of situations, if we're with God. And if God is with us, we know that He will protect us until our time is up. If our time is up, He'll let it happen. If it's not up, we don't have to worry. Trust Him and just do right and keep your heart and mind on Him. All right, so now let's look. That takes us to the end of the first section. Then we look at attacks, arithmetic, and assurance. So we're going to get to arithmetic soon. He talks about the attacks of opponents in verses 5, 6, and 7. I'm just going to quickly go through this. They injure my cause. They fight against me. And all that my words stand for all day long, they're against me. All of their evil plans and purposes are against me, the last part of verse 5. They stir up strife. They lurk secretly in their hiding places. You'll see this in verse 6. They carefully watch my steps for an opportunity. They're lying in wait in order to take my life. The word for life is the Hebrew word for soul. The word soul doesn't always refer to the immaterial part of your body. Sometimes it just means you. My soul can refer to myself. And that's the way that David was looking at it here. They were after my soul. Because you know, a human being can't hurt your soul, your immaterial part of you, but they can hurt your life. And that's what David was talking about here. And so, shall they escape because of their wickedness? He says in verse 7. And then the last little point in this first section, he pleads for God in his righteous anger to cast them down and all wicked peoples. The last part of verse 7. So I've skipped ahead to verse 7. To cast them down, and then they will turn back in defeat, verse 9. So that's that part of it. Now we talk about the part that I'm really looking forward to, the arithmetic of God. God's arithmetic. Verse 8. You tell my wanderings. The idea, the literal idea here is God, the word tell here has the idea of you take account. You take account. You're looking at all the details. And you could actually look at this as counting and knowing the number of every incident in David's life. So you take account, you number my wanderings. Everywhere I go, you're there. And the word you is very emphatic. It's you are doing this. Now, the word for wandering there in verse 8, this you might be interested in this, maybe you're not. This is the only place in the entire Old Testament that this verb is used. Right here. But the noun for wandering is used in Genesis chapter 4, verse 12. For Cain, after he killed Abel, God said, you're going to be a wanderer on the earth. And he ended up going to the land of what? Do you remember the word that's used? The land of Nod. That's this word, N-O-D. It's spelled in English, the Hebrew word, Nod. It means wandering. The land of Nod, or Nod, however we say it, is the land of wandering. It's the only other place it's used, and it's referring to a specific location in Genesis. The verb is used twice. The verb to wander is used in verse 12 and verse 14 because Cain was a wanderer around the earth because of God's punishment in his life. But when David was wandering, and boy, was David a wanderer. Read Samuel. He was going from place to place to place, all through the desert areas in southern Judea. He was wandering to escape from Saul. But David says, everywhere I wander, you know exactly where I am. You keep track of it. You count every place. You are there in every place that I am. So David realizes that each day of his wandering, each nook in which he has found shelter, each step that he has taken, every artifice or trick by which he has baffled his foes, all have been numbered by his heavenly Father, and they are under God's control. That's a wonderful thing as you stop and think about it, because how could one man escape an entire army? Think about it. How could he escape an entire army with the powerful weapons and all the people they had that could go in different directions? And how could he avoid them every single time? It was only by the help of God that that was possible. And then we come to verse 8. God puts David's tears in his bottle. What a vivid picture. David must have cried and wept many times over all the things that were happening in his life, for all the tragic experiences that he had seen. Can you imagine the first time he ran away from Saul, and he and Jonathan met out in the field, and they said their farewells to each other. Jonathan said, I know someday you're going to be king. Once you become king, please remember me, because I've been your faithful friend. I'm not like my dad. And David took off. And David he didn't have time to get together rations and food. And he had some people that gathered around him, and a few people went with him when he fled. And they stopped at Abimelech the priest to ask if he had any food. He said, well, the only food I have is the bread that I've taken off the table of showbread. Every day I take one loaf off, I put a new one on, and I have some of that showbread, the older showbread, because every day they put a new one on. And he said, you're welcome to have this. He said, do you have any weapons here? He said, I have the sword of Goliath. David said, that's good. Can you imagine how heavy that sword was if Goliath was using it? Goliath was over 9 feet tall, and he must have weighed hundreds of pounds. He was a big, strapping Philistine, the biggest one in their entire army. You remember the story. I'll take that sword. Well, later on, Saul found out that David had stopped there because there was a man there who was of another nationality, and he betrayed David to Saul. Because Saul asked, who helps David? How come David always escapes whenever I'm trying to capture him? I have a traitor here in the camp. And anyway, Doeg, the Edomite, was there with the priest that day. I don't know what he was doing there. And he heard what happened between the priest and David. And he betrayed the priest to Saul. And he said, Abimelech gave him food and gave him a weapon. And Saul said, they're all going to die. And Saul went over there and killed the high priest and all of his family that was there. Everybody that was there, he slaughtered them. What a man Saul was. What a man he was. How wicked. Do you think David shed any tears over that, knowing that he was the one that was at fault for all that happening and all the other things that happened? As he shed these tears, what David is saying here, figuratively speaking, God has collected every single tear, put them in his bottle. He has every tear, and he remembers every sorrow, every problem that I've gone through. God has kept those and preserved those, and God has taken care of me in every detail of my life. What a beautiful thought. The word bottle just refers to a skin that they would put wine in or milk in or water in. That's what he's referring to. And he obviously cried many tears. Now he also says in the last part of verse 8, you have put my tears not only in a bottle, but also they are in God's book. This is God's book of remembrance. God's book of remembrance. God would remember him. God had a plan for David, and God would be with him. And so David is saying, I am secure. You look at his situation, you might think he's the most insecure person in the world. but he was secure. He was secure in God. And so he goes on there in verses 10 and 11, 9. He says, when I cry unto you, then shall my enemies turn back. This I know. And look at the last words. For God is for me. God is for me. What's that remind you of in the New Testament? What verse do you think of that says almost the same thing in the New Testament? Anybody remember? What is it? If God is for us, who could be against us? That's in Romans chapter what? 8. Romans 8, verse 30. Well, it's right there in your notes. Romans chapter 8, verse 31. If God is for us, who could be against us? Now, in Psalm 118, verse 8, we have the same statement. God is for me, and it's also combined with other words from this psalm. The last part of verse 11 says, I will not be afraid. What can man do unto me? That's found in Psalm 118, verse 6. Now, he says also in verse 10, in God I will praise his word, his promises, what his statements are, guarantees to me and to any believer. I praise his word. In his word is true and it is fulfilled. Note that here in the second line, there's a different name used for God. Look at it, verse 10. All capital letters. That's not Elohim. What is that? Yahweh. That's Yahweh, or Jehovah, as a lot of people say it, but the name is actually pronounced Yahweh in Hebrew. Yahweh is his covenant name, his relationship with his people. He has a special relationship with his people, and it's used here to bring that emphasis out. I will praise him, his word, because in the covenant God, Yahweh, I will praise his word. Verse 11, in God I have put my trust. I will not be afraid. What can man do to me? This time the actual word for man instead of flesh is used, as was back in verse 4. What can man do unto me? Wow, what a beautiful thought. And then we conclude with verses 12 and 13. His vows and his victory. His vows and his victory. Now when David said, your vows are upon me, O God, I will render praises unto you. When he says, your vows are upon me, what do you think he is talking about there?
Keeping his commandments, keeping his ordinances, keeping his word.
Okay, that's one thought. Yes, David does want to keep his commands, keep his word, keep his ordinances. But when you make a vow, what are you doing when you make a vow? You say you're going to what?
You're going to do this. In most cases, if you do this.
Because God does this, I promise that I will do that. I will follow it up. Usually it was something like, God, if you will answer my prayers, if you'll protect me, if you'll meet the needs that I have, when I get back, when I'm able to, I can't do it now because I'm on the run, but when I get back, I'm going to go to your house. I'm going to bring my sacrifices. I'm going to worship you, and I'm going to praise you in front of the whole congregation, and I'm going to offer my sacrifices. He's not doing this to bribe God. He's simply saying, this is my thanksgiving that I'm going to do as soon as I have the opportunity. Your vows are upon me. That's what he's talking about there. I am obligated to keep the vows that I make unto you, God, and I will offer you, he goes on to say, I will offer you thank offerings. Praises are the idea of a thank offering that he will give to God. And then verse 13, the victory and deliverance is certain and sure. He says, you have delivered my soul. Now notice, he had not yet been delivered finally when he wrote these words. He hadn't been, Saul was still alive. Saul was still chasing him for some time after that incident, before finally Saul died in battle and the battle was over. But he says it as though it's already done. That's what faith can do. It's already happened. He's so confident it's going to happen. He said, you have delivered me, my soul, from death. Will you not deliver my feet from falling, O God, that I may walk before God in the light of the living? Lord, the reason I want to be delivered is I want to keep serving you. I want to keep leading people unto you and tell people of what you've done for me. And He wants other people to share this joy. And he has. He wrote this psalm, and we're talking about it tonight, and many, many other people have talked about the words of this psalm down through the years. And the last bullet point on the very last page, life is the opposite of death. When he says at the end of verse 13, that I may walk before God in the light of the living. Light refers to the light of life. And life is the opposite of death. The light of life, therefore, is the opposite of the night of Hades, the place of the departed dead, where people are secluded from God and from God's revelation in human history. God's going to keep me alive. He's going to spare me so I can serve him and so I can worship him. So we conclude simply how we began. God is with us. God was with David. God is with you. God is with me. I need not fear. I remember talking to someone recently that had a near-death experience, had a very, very serious health problem. And I don't remember who it was now, but I think it was a person here at Berean. And they talked about how when they were going through this experience that could have led to death, that they had a calmness and peace. And they weren't afraid. And I experienced that, and I shared this with some of you before. When I had COVID, I got COVID pneumonia, and I was in the hospital for 6 days. I was starting to get better. Came home. And then I had to go back in about 5 days later, and it turned out that I had pulmonary embolisms, multiple pulmonary blood clots in my lungs. If one of those had broken loose and gone to my brain or gone to my heart, guess what could have happened? We all know. Here's the thing. I've always thought in my life, what will happen if I ever get in a place where I'm in actual danger, when I'm in real danger? What will I think? Will I be afraid? I can honestly tell you this evening, I had such a peace, I wasn't worried at all. I knew God had it. And God would do what was best. And so I trusted him. I never, at first I wasn't really worried because I didn't know I had blood clots because my wife was talking to the doctor while I was in the ER, and she was using nurse language. And so she must have said pulmonary emboli, and I had no idea what that was at the time. And so I didn't realize it. But she was arguing with the doctor. The doctor said he doesn't need a CT scan because I put him on a blood thinner the first time he came in here 10 days ago. He can't have any blood clots, this pulmonary emboli, he told her. And she said, look, he has every symptom. And I know you're the doctor, but I'm his wife. And I want him to have a CT scan. God used Cindy to help save my life too. Do you see what I'm trying to say? I've often thought about that, and I wonder how many people don't have a nurse right by their side when they're in a situation like that, and doctors make bad choices, and the results might be totally different. But you see, the bottom line is, though, we don't have to be afraid, really. Even when your life is in danger, you don't have to be afraid. We can trust in God. And God, you know he has your back. You know he's going to do the best thing for you. One of the clues that I had that it was a scary time was when I was in that situation, I got a text from my son David, my oldest boy, and he wrote the nicest text to me he said the nicest things that I had ever heard him say in my entire life. He's always been a good boy. He's always been respectful. He's always been obedient, for the most part. But he's never said, he get a whole paragraph, some of the nicest things he could have said. And then after I read it, I said, he thinks I'm going to die. He's saying it because he thinks I'm going to die. And that was one of my best experiences through that whole thing, is having those words come from my son. And I decided as soon as I get out of the hospital, I'm going to print this. I'm going to keep it so if I ever have to, I can remind him of what he said. But and so I talked to him about it later and joked with him a little bit. But anyway, folks, we don't need to be afraid. Now let's take out our prayer sheets tonight.
to sing verse 3?
Yes, I want to sing the third stanza. Thank you. I would have forgotten. Of number 412. Oh, I opened right to it. 412. How can I fear the first stanza? And then we'll take our prayer requests. The third. Last verse. So notice that Jesus is king.